Within weeks, the Eastbourne result was to be overshadowed by even more dramatic shifts in political power. The ancient ceremonies masked the realities of Tory gloom as MPs were summoned to the House of Lords by Black Rod to hear the speech from the throne. MPs trooped in to hear the Queen outline the government's business for the coming session.
The government will work to strengthen still further the good relations between the United Kingdom and the Soviet Union, and to buttress the new democracies in Eastern Europe.
And so the ceremony was over, and MPs went back into their own chambers to begin the debate on the Queen's speech. Few then could have imagined the kind of political drama that lay just a few days ahead. Once again, it was the issue of Europe that sparked the whole thing off. Mrs. Thatcher was reporting on her recent visit to the European summit in Rome.
The President of the Commission, Mr. Delors, said at press conference the other day that he wanted the European Parliament to be the democratic body of the community, he wanted the Commission to be the executive, and he wanted the Council of Ministers to be the Senate. No, no, no.
For Sir Geoffrey Howe, who'd been sacked as Foreign Secretary for allegedly being too pro-European, that speech was the last straw. He resigned as Deputy Prime Minister, saying he could no longer serve in a government with whose style and substance he so profoundly disagreed. But the coup de grace was yet to come. It's a tradition that ministers who resign are allowed to make a short speech to the House explaining their reasons. Usually it's a fairly uncontroversial occasion, more of a formality. Not this time. Sir Geoffrey's resignation speech was devastating.
It's rather like sending your opening batsmen to the crease, only for them to find, the moment the first balls are bowled, that their bats have been broken before the game by the team captain.
He said Mrs. Thatcher, by her attitude to Europe, was putting the country's future at risk, and he urged Conservatives to reconsider the party leadership.
The time has come for others to consider their own response to the tragic conflict of loyalties with which I have myself wrestled for perhaps too long.
It was the signal Michael Heseltine had been waiting for. He announced that he would stand against Mrs. Thatcher in the leadership elections. At the Commons, the excitement was intense. Mrs. Thatcher was just 2 votes short of an outright win. There would have to be a second ballot. But would she stand? In Paris, a startled John Sargent found out.
I'd have thought now there will be a long series of consultations, backwards and forwards to London.
Now, the Prime Minister is behind you, John.
Prime Minister. Mrs. Thatcher, could I ask you to comment?
Good evening. Good evening,
Where's the microphone? It's here. This is the microphone.
Naturally very pleased that I got more than half the parliamentary party, and disappointed that it's not quite enough to win on the first ballot. So I confirm it is my intention to let my name go forward for the second ballot.
Mrs. Thatcher cut short her Paris trip and rushed back to Downing Street to hear what was happening. The news wasn't good. As members of her cabinet were called in to see her, it was becoming plain that not enough of them were prepared to support her. She would lose the second ballot, she was told. There was no alternative but to head for the palace to tell the Queen she was resigning. The way was now clear for others to stand against Mr. Heseltine.
Mrs. Thatcher returned after half an hour to prepare for Prime Minister's questions in the Commons and the debate of no confidence in her government initiated by Labour. It was to be an extraordinary parliamentary occasion, an ordeal and also a triumph. Nothing like it has ever been televised before. When Mrs. Thatcher entered the chamber, Tory MPs stood up as a sign of respect. The general mood was friendly and understanding. Most MPs were anxious not to exploit the occasion. When the no-confidence debate started, her possible successors from the cabinet were on the front bench.
I beg to move.
As for Mr. Heseltine himself, after clearing the first hurdle, he fell at the second. It was the Chancellor of the Exchequer, John Major, who came through with enough votes to clinch the title. Although technically a third ballot should have been held, the other two contenders knew they couldn't win. Both withdrew.
Let him be now elected unanimously to show our unity.
That in the new circumstances, John Major is the right leader for this task.
So John Major became the new Prime Minister. No one was more delighted than Mrs. Thatcher herself, who slipped next door to congratulate him and took a wistful look at the reporters assembled outside the door of number 11. And so Mrs. Thatcher's 11-year reign at the top of British political life was over. Her final departure from number 10 was a deeply emotional occasion.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're leaving Downing Street for the last time after 11 and a half wonderful years, and we're very happy that we leave the United Kingdom in a very, very much better state than when we came here 11 and a half years ago. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
As the Thatchers left number 10 for the last time, the new Prime Minister went to Buckingham Palace to seek the Queen's permission to form a new government. Mr. and Mrs. Thatcher, meantime, returned to the family home in Dulwich. There, a few days later, they heard that the Queen had appointed Mrs. Thatcher to the Order of Merit. Her husband, Dennis, was made an hereditary baronet. A new political era was about to begin.
In particular, I want to see us build a country that is at ease with itself, a country that is confident, and a country that is prepared and willing to make the changes necessary to provide a better quality of life for all our citizens.
As 1990 came to a close and the siren's mournful wail filled the Gulf night air, most thoughts were turned towards the threat of war. For the hundreds of thousands of troops now stationed in the desert, Christmas took on a special meaning.
Our newborn king to see, ba-ra-ba-bum-bum. Our finest gifts to bring, ba-ra-ba-bum-bum.
Presents for the troops were sent out by the ton. At least they knew that the holiday celebrations would probably proceed untroubled. The deadline was January the 15th. If by then Iraq hadn't started to withdraw from Kuwait, force would be used to throw them out. It was now a question of waiting, and to pass the time and to bring a little Christmas cheer to the men and women at the front, a live television link was set up so that families could join together in a communal sing-song. And the Princess of Wales did her bit. She visited wives and families of troops in the Gulf and gave them a few words of comfort.
To say that I, along with so many others at home, understand and sympathise with you at this time sounds very inadequate and rather too easy. But it is the least I can do, and I do feel for you with all my heart.
It's not quite what you'd expect to find in the streets of Baghdad. An enormous stuffed Santa Claus for a mere £450. Nor would you expect to see Christmas trees for sale by the dozen. In the big hotels here, they've been putting the decorations up for a week now. Partly, of course, it's just another aspect of the reach-me-down Western culture, which seems to pervade the entire world. But many of the children who turned up with their mothers at this hotel children's party were themselves Christian, part of a community 1 million or so strong in Iraq. So Father Christmas is part of their lives too. even though the presents he handed out included things like models of American military helicopters, which could be in action here soon. And even on a big occasion like this, there were songs of praise to Saddam Hussein. Nearby, the Seventh-day Adventists were singing carols in Arabic. Tonight, at a Chaldean Christian church in Baghdad, they were celebrating a pre-Christmas Mass. The Chaldeans recognize the Pope, but follow a ritual which dates back to the early years of Christianity. And yet, like so much else here, there are strange echoes of the world that Iraq is in conflict with.
And so, as the world waited for war, 1990 was over. This is one of a series of cassettes